Hello and welcome to today's video, and we're going to really look at ethics and legal today from an entrepreneurial point of view. And I guess today's class is maybe best described as a introduction to these concepts and an introduction to some legal and ethical considerations that maybe you should be aware of. So while we won't go into these in great depth, this will be for yourself in your own assessments. We will introduce you to the topics. So these are the things that we're going to cover today. What is ethics, business ethics, legal representation, founder agreements, and these things, licenses and business ownership. And each of these points you will be covering, as I said, for your assessment due at the end of the semester. So we'll start off with what is ethics. And I'm sure maybe you know this, but ethics, we've written here, is the moral principles that govern a person's behavior or the conducting of an activity. So it's the principles that you live your life by are your ethics, I guess. And if your principles are good, you believe in fairness and equality, you don't lie to people, these are good ethics. Whereas if your principles are, for example, that you're deceitful, that you are happy to not tell the truth to suit yourself, and different things like that, well, that's what we can consider unethical. And then business ethics, I guess, is much the same except applied to business. And so we say business ethics, which can be called corporate ethics, is a form of applied ethics that examines the principles that we've already talked about that arise in a business environment. And it sort of it applies to all aspects of business conduct and is relevant to the conduct of individuals and entire organizations. So it's the same principles and moral values that you would have as a person. Well, are these applied in your business? And I think it's important that businesses should be ethically sound and should not be practicing in deceit or wrongfulness. But business can be, of course, a cutthroat world, dog eat dog. And I've often discussed ethics with classes, and you have to ask the question, well, if I done something wrong and I made a profit of 100,000 out of it and I got fined 20,000, is it worth doing? And these are the dilemmas that we have to decide things like this when we're in business ethics. But it's much more than just those decisions. It's the day-to-day relationships, as we say. It's the what is our tolerance to bullying in the workplace? What is our tolerance to speaking colleagues speaking derogatorily to each other, or in an unfair way. So let's look at that. Just a couple of things. Initial ethical and legal issues facing a new company or firm or business, and we're going to look a little bit more at this, but we'll look at all of these today. So, establishing a strong ethical culture, just few pointers, I guess, for you, that if you are setting up your own business and your own company, I think the best way is to lead by example. It's good for the leader of a company to set good examples, and this is the same in any organization, whether it's a football team. Leaders set the examples, they set strong ethical cultures. They are your cultural creators within the industry, and you have to be one of those cultural architects, or one of those people that build the culture of the company. Establishing a code of conduct, well, in modern society, where we're very politically correct, and a code of conduct is really required in most businesses now in terms of how the norms of behavior within that industry, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. Implementing ethic training programs can be good ways just to train employees and I suppose address ethical situations, because again, what you think is unethical or what someone else thinks is unethical, unless it's pointed out to them, they may not even see it as unethical. So, it is important that you state that this is, we treat everyone with respect. And so we just see here, we've got sort of a list of some of the advantages of, maintaining a good ethical culture, and I suppose we look down here, improve customer loyalty. It's it's business is no different to yourself, and in many ways we're often selling ourselves as a business, if you like, in many ways. And improved customer loyalty, improved employee commitment. If it's a fair and equitable place, then your customers tend to be more happier. Your brand reputation can come under attack if you're seen to be practicing in unethical practices. Of course, the same if you're looking for investments of banks or investors. Your reputation will precede you, and the better your ethical culture, of course, the better it is for you. So that's ethics basically, and we'll just look now at choosing an attorney, or what is the best method of doing that for your business. So we can see our man Better Call Saul here. So just a couple of things there on attorneys and lawyers. Again, just to sort of an introduction, what a lawyer, attorney, solicitor is: someone that represents our company or our business in matters of legality or any legal issues that we have. We can use them for consultancy, and I think usually the less that you have to use them, the better. But it's important just for an entrepreneur to select an attorney, lawyer as early as possible when developing a business venture. And we'll look at that in a moment in terms of founders agreement, just to have someone to help facilitate that. It is critically important that the attorney be familiar with startup issues. Well, yes, I suppose it is. We try and in business go for business lawyers as opposed to a lawyer that specializes in something else, maybe family law. It wouldn't be much use to us for starting up a business. I do use the term attorney, lawyer, and solicitor interchangeably, because some of them are used in American businesses, some in UK businesses, and some in the Middle Eastern businesses. So we'll just use them interchangeably, but they refer to legal representative. And intellectual property, I suppose, more for our field of work, web media and creating programs, and well, I suppose not our every kind of work. And we'll look at intellectual property in more detail in our next video and next class, but for here we can just assume that it is issues dealing with intellectual property, patents, trademarks, copyrights, trade secrets, and the like of that there. And if you're needing or using one of those things, or you're trying to protect copyright, for example, it's essential to use an attorney that specializes in that, because they will be familiar with loopholes and potential problems that can arise. There's just a list there of things in select an attorney, but I'm not going to go into this in great detail. There's lots of solicitors out there, and you do your research really before you select your appropriate solicitor, and that's the best advice. You can look through that slide in your own time. we do use a solicitor when drafting a founders agreement, but what is a founders agreement? Well, it's an agreement between one or more people, and that is, when we're setting up a business, an entrepreneurial business, an e-commerce business, and if there's more than one person involved in that setting up of a business, then you set up an agreement between the founders, and that agreement will deal with issues that are, things like ownership and percentage of ownership, who owns much, how will it be split, in terms of the ownership, and things like sweat equity, which are how much effort perhaps one person put in. So sweat equity refers to effort. So for example, if I was a founder and I had been developing a platform for a year, and then I got in a business investor, well, should that business investor own the same amount of me? How much is the value of the effort that I put in over the last 2 years? Um, and these are things that we have to consider in a founders agreement. So the items to include in the founders agreement are shown in the following slide. And again, without going into too much detail, nature of the business, identity of the founders, type of business ownership, which we're going to look at in a moment, whether it's a partnership or whatever, stock division of ownership, consideration for shares, any intellectual property, does the business own it, or should it be signed over to the business? So even if I came up with the idea, should my idea be owned by the business rather than by me? And these are decisions that you have to make. I'm not saying one way or the other is the best. It depends on the idea, of course. But these are things that we include in a founders agreement. And if they're not included, they can come back to haunt you in the future if if there was a fallout in the partnership. So it is good to have these founders agreements in place. And of course, a buyback clause is the option where I might take an investor who invests in my company for 100,000 tomorrow, but in 2 years' time, I have the option of buying back his 40% share for 500,000, and something like that. There can be options like that in the founders agreement. So that's just a founders agreement. Avoiding legal disputes, and I mean, I think it's very important to try and avoid legal disputes, and most legal disputes are a result of misunderstanding, sloppiness, or lack of knowledge. And I've been involved in many legal disputes in my capacities of running different businesses, and you're better off avoiding them where possible. They're costly, if they can be resolved, and usually if they could be resolved beforehand, by good draft founders agreements and good understanding amongst the two parties involved. And I think I'd agree most of the ones I've been involved in are usually just down to misunderstanding, this sloppiness and lack of knowledge. So there are some steps that we take here to avoid legal disputes. Meet all contractual obligations. So make sure that you do everything that you are contractually obliged to do. Avoid undercapitalization. So that's avoid getting caught out for lack of money, and get everything in writing, and set good standards. And I've come across this as well, although it is tempting to try to show people you trust them by not insisting on written agreements. It's not a good practice, and it's not. You see families split apart, friends. I've seen friends split apart by business agreements that weren't written down, and it's a really simple thing to do. And I think the best way of doing it, even if you were going into business with your brother or sister, is what I used to say is well, just in case anything happens to me, this is written down, and it's on paper, and it's better that it's written down just in case I'm in a car accident, or God, whatever would happen. So it's that's a good way of just getting around it, and that you're almost selling it as protection to the other person as well, and that's not really unethical, because it is the right thing to do to have a written agreement in place. One of the simplest ways to avoid misunderstandings is to get everything in writing. And that makes sense, and then when you see something written down as well before you sign it, you can sort of reassess it when it's written down. Okay, is your understanding of that the same as my understanding of that? And you can discuss it further. We won't go through this in too much detail at all, really, except for to say that for a lot of businesses, and most businesses, you do require permits and licenses to operate your business. So, for example, in the food industry, you're going to need permits from the Environmental Health Office. You're going to need it from the health and safety, the fire authorities, that you have the right health and safety, and should there be any fire issues or fire escape issues and things like that, there you have to have the right permits before you can run that. That's just an example. Every individual industry and business have their own types of permits and licenses that you should be aware of, and it's important that you have these in place and do all the right things to get these in place, because it can be detrimental to your business to not have them in place. So let's see. Along with obtaining appropriate licenses, some businesses may to obtain more than one. Yeah, okay, so some examples there. And here in Bahrain, you have to apply for a license. Any business has to apply for a business license through the government. So you can't set up a business here in Bahrain without applying for the business license here in Bahrain. So that that's a legal entity that you need to provide a business here. The last thing we're going to look at today is just the type of ownerships, and again, without too much detail, it's just to introduce you to the basic concepts of a sole proprietorship, partnership, corporation, limited liability company. And just these are things to consider in each of these, and these are usually the advantages or disadvantages of each company that you decide. So we will look at the four in a second, but firstly, the things that we consider are the cost of setting up and maintaining that legal form, the extent to which a person can be shielded from the liabilities of the business. And when we say liabilities of the business, we mean things that the business can be liable for. So debts, if a business accrues debt, is it the business that's liable for that debt? Or is it the owner of the business that's liable for that debt? And depending on the type of business that you set up, will depend on who is liable. And of course, liable is that you would be in charge of the debt, or the debt would be put on you if you were liable. Tax considerations, and again here in Bahrain there are business taxes, and around the world of course, and each company has different tax considerations, and the number of types of investors involved. So they're just sort of the 3 or 4 things, and for your assessment you'll be looking at the advantages and disadvantages of each of these. We won't go through the advantages and disadvantages too much, rather just stating what they are. So a sole proprietorship, which is the simplest form of a business entity, is a sole proprietorship, and that is a form of business involving one person, and that person and the business are essentially the same. So if I have a small business on my own, I am liable for the debts of the business. So if my business takes out a business loan and the business cannot afford to repay the loan, well, the bank or the person that loans the money could come after my own personal property, like my house or my car or whatever, and repossess that to make up the shortfall of the debts. There are tax implications as well. A sole proprietorship is not a separate legal entity. The sole proprietor is responsible for all liabilities of the business, and this is a significant drawback. One of the advantages is that sole proprietorships are easy to set up as well. So they're quite easy to set up a sole proprietorship. Partnerships, and a partnership is a formal agreement by 2 or more parties to manage and operate a business and share its profits. If 2 or more people start a business, they must organize as a partnership, corporation, or a limited liability. So they can't set up, as a sole proprietorship. A partnership is organized as either general or limited liability partners, and a general partnership is a form of business organization where 2 or more people pool their skills, ability, and resources to run the business. The primary advantage of this is that all partners are liable for the partnership's debts and obligations, so it's not just on one person. And a limited partnership, which is a modified type of general partnership. The major difference between these two is the limited partnership includes two classes of owners, general partners and limited partners. The general partners are limited for the debts and obligations of the partnership, but the limited partners are only liable up to the amount of their investment, which is important. So I would only be limited to the amount that I invest. So if I'm a partner in this company, but I've only invested 50 or 100,000 in the business, well, I'm only ever liable for that amount of money. So a corporation is a separate legal entity organized under the authority of a state, and it is distinct from its owners. So what that means is the corporation itself enjoys, the rights and the responsibilities of an individual, and they can enter contracts, loans, they can borrow money, sue, be sued, hire employees, things like this here. So a corporation it has the privileges, I guess, of an owner, but it's a separate legal entity. And it is a separate legal entity that, in the eyes of the law, is separate from the owner. In most cases, a corporation shields its owner, it protects its owner, the shareholders, from personal liability of the debts of the corporation. So, as we said earlier, someone who is a sole proprietor, they are liable for any loans that the business has. Well, the corporation, the person, is not liable for any loans. Maybe one of the disadvantages is that they are much more difficult to set up. A corporation is governed by a board of directors elected by shareholders, and a corporation is formed by filing articles of incorporation. Okay. And then lastly, just limited liability companies. So limited liabilities is a form of business ownership that, it's gaining popularity in the US, but that has nothing to do for us here in the Middle East or in Europe. It is a popular choice for startup companies, and the reason being is that the company combines the limited liability advantages of a corporation with the tax advantages of a partnership. Excuse me. So there are benefits of a partnership, tax advantages. And the liability, you're not wholly liability. A limited liability company does not pay taxes. Profits and losses are passed through the tax returns of the owners. So that is it really for today's class, for preparing a proper ethical and legal foundation. We're really just introducing you to these concepts. What is ethics? What is business ethics? A strong culture, legal representation, founders agreements, license and permits, and business ownership. And I hope that this has given you a good, simple introduction to those concepts. And we will discuss this in class in more detail in our next class. And I look forward to seeing you then. I hope you all have a great day, and we'll chat soon. Take care.